This is a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District Board of Education.
So glad that you could join us for our community budget forum. Just to give you a little bit of a lay of the land, I'm going to spend just a few minutes here at the beginning walking through some budget information, our take on where we are currently, and some of the feedback that you provided to us in the community thought exchange regarding the budget. Just the highlights, some very high level conversations about that, some of the themes that we noticed, and what some of our thinking is right now. We'd really like to spend the bulk of the time, though, having you work in small groups with board members and other administrators to have a discussion, really authentically digging into how you feel, help us understand and basically triangulate the data. So you provided it in the thought exchange, but you in this room and in this space and in this time right now can give us a lot more feedback by elaborating on what you think people meant in those thoughts and what more you'd like to add to the conversation. We'd really like to hear from you and focus more on hearing from you than you hearing from us, quite frankly. You have plenty of opportunities to hear my voice, probably way too many. So we're looking forward to that kind of conversation. We'll go through some information, jump into that, and then have each of your groups share out at the end with a few questions about what else we need to know, what else we should be thinking about, what we may have missed, what your thoughts on the thoughts were, so to speak. So if you just give me a couple minutes, I promise you we'll give you a lot more than that on the other side. Starting out, sorry about that. Our process and the plan, and essentially kind of getting at what does it look like for us in terms of the budget process? How does this work? What do we do along the way? We review, we plan, we prepare, we so-called scrub the numbers all of the time throughout the fall, throughout really every month of the year. We're always looking month to month at how we are doing and what things are costing, what types of changes in program we might be making going forward, and what that means for overall spending. And we communicate out as the calendar year is coming to a close and as we're approaching the budget season, so to speak, where we are in terms of the budget and some of the things that we are thinking about. In January, the governor makes a proposal. By law, he's required to take the first step in the state budget process, and we review what he's proposed. And typically at that point, we start to ask the community for input on what the budget should look like going into next year. What are the priorities, basically? How do people feel about it? Meanwhile, we advocate, we plan, we review, we meet with legislators, we participate in lots of county and statewide committees asking for more feedback, really looking to try and get more information, but also to make sure people understand the things that are going on with us at the same time. We also ask for more input in opportunities like this evening, coming back to you and saying, here's where we're at right now, this is what we know, this is what we're learning, this is the kind of advocacy that we are presenting to people. What else do we need to know, and what else is what other perspectives do you have? We then react to what we're being told, to what we sense the final budget may look like from the state, and what the community is telling us they'd like to prioritize in their spending plan in the budget. We discuss those plans and those possibilities and everything that's in play. And meanwhile, the other track is the internal track of having these kinds of discussions, communicating internally, working with budget makers to really dig into the numbers and figure out how to do things more efficiently and what we need to have great plans in place for kids. We share out again and we ask for input, and we have this forum, we have another forum towards the end of the month. We have budget meetings, we have all different opportunities for people to share their perspective with us, and we'll present to any group, anywhere, anytime, who would like to provide feedback and hear more about the budget as well. And we do that all over the next couple of months as well. The Assembly and the Senate make their proposals, and an agreement is finally reached between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor. That allows us then to finalize our proposal to present to the community, the spending plan that, based on the state's budget, we feel makes the most sense, and then voters get to vote on that. So that's just kind of the broad 1,000-foot view of how this works, how we gather feedback, and how we come to a final place. Here's what we think we know right now. First of all, the governor proposed a budget that concerns us in two significant ways. One is foundation aid, which is likely to remain flat in that proposal. The second is the collapse of what are called expense-based or categorical aids. And those are aid categories such as transportation that are paid the year after the expense is incurred. So the way the state works in their funding formula, in addition to foundation aid, which is always our biggest concern, by the way, flat means we'll be at 49.5% of what we're actually due, some $8 million short. The other number is about 16% then difference in your taxes because of the state falling short in that area. The expense-based aids are meant to level the playing field, so to speak. And the way this works is if you picture a district perhaps in the Adirondacks where kids might be going 50 miles both ways to get to school, the mileage is used to calculate how much aid they would get, how much transportation aid, because simply it wouldn't be fair for that district where kids are so far apart to have that incredible expense of getting them to school if we don't have that. So the state reimburses a portion of that cost so that it levels the playing field. And they do that the next year after you incur the expense. Well, the governor has proposed collapsing all the categories into a formula-based system, very similar to foundation aid. And Brighton, we know how well that's working for us, right? So that's a huge concern because it becomes then a very political process that can be manipulated every year, similar to what's happening right now with our foundation aid. So we don't want to see that happen. Not only that, they've already promised the money for what we spent last year, and they ought to be paying that. So aid will be a challenge, but we think it likely will be better than his proposal. So that's kind of our thinking right now. We have a healthy balance sheet. In other words, we have rainy day funds. It's pouring, so the rainy day is here, and that's something we need to really consider is how do we utilize the funds that you have put aside, that you as a community have supported in terms of a financial plan and prudent spending over time to really cushion the blow and make sure we take care of programs for kids now. Full day K was promised, and it is a priority. It was promised, and it was a priority. You invested in a beautiful space at Council Rock, not just a beautiful space, but an effective space, the space that our kids need, K through 2, in fact, but in that space to add a full day kindergarten program, so it's a priority for us as well. Our community does not want to exceed the cap. That's very clear to us. We recognize that. We realize that. That came through in the exchange as well. And we don't want to reduce services as a community. So we as a district don't, but also it's very clear in the community, any reduction in service is just simply not acceptable, particularly to maintain the very high standard we have for our kids and the very high performance, which continues to be exceptional in our school and in our community. We need to do everything we can to have students in school 5 days a week. That's very clear to us. Couldn't be a higher priority for us. We agree. That came out loud and clear in the exchange, and we're in the same place. We need to do everything we can to have students in school 5 days a week, and it's got to be safe for both kids, for their families, but also for our staff. That is a high priority as well. And there's a need for stability and predictability. And so we have this sense as a group that the community also needs to know that we're going to be okay, that it will be all right, that we will be able to meet everybody's needs, add full day kindergarten, stay under the cap, keep programs. We realize that. We recognize that in a time where there's a lot of things that are not stable, our community needs stability. They need predictability. They don't need this everything hanging in the balance feeling every year in the budget process. It's very frustrating to us, and we know it is for the community too. That doesn't take away the urgency for getting more state aid, for getting that foundation aid that we're due. But gosh, it seems like we're always at the will of that, and that it's very frustrating for people, and we get it. So we sense that need as well. That's what we know now. Some of the themes that the Thought Exchange offered to us: don't cut, reopen schools, full day K should be implemented. It should say full day K, my apologies. Do not exceed the cap, fight for aid. Don't give up that fight. We're entitled to that money. Here's some quick summaries of the exchange information. If you're here, you likely know the question. Essentially, we asked what should be prioritized as we think about our expenses, as we think about the spending plan for next year. 366 people participated. That's very close to our typical, around 350 to 400 people usually engage in our budget surveys. They shared 187 different thoughts. And I promise you, we review every single one of those thoughts, every single one, whether they're at the top, the bottom, came in late, came in at the beginning of the exchange. We monitor that regularly, and we review every single thought, and they all make a difference. 64% were parents or caregivers, 7% community members, 25% staff members, important part of our community too, and 4% considered themselves something other than that. In terms of the levels, pretty evenly spread out between Council Rock, the middle school, high school, smaller number from the French Road area, 28% though saying they have kids in multiple buildings. And if you think about the age level of families, usually probably a lot of people with kids in French Road, they're kind of in like the sandwich spot, probably have kids in another building and may have either chosen the other building or went to the multiple building category. So I'd say pretty evenly spread across the district. This is just a word cloud, gives you a sense of kind of the emphasis of people's thoughts, the things that were mentioned most often. And among the top thoughts, and I'll talk to you about the bottom thoughts as well, people said, keep fighting for foundation aid. We want to help. Don't cut any more teachers. Time to cut administrators. Ironically, I will point out when we search, because we can search by staff, by parents, by community members, not on who put what thought in, but what people's starring tendencies were. And I thought it was interesting that our staff actually did not rate that very highly. We're pretty lean in that area, but it's always an area that I absolutely understand why people would cite that and say, listen, you're not working as closely with kids as a teacher. My child's classroom teacher shouldn't go. So we get that part too. Understood, and something we always look at. If we have learned anything over this past year, it is that kids need sports or arts or whatever extracurriculars are involved with. Top priority is to have kids engaged, active in learning in person as many days as possible. For whatever reason, BCSD is adverse to surveying families. Send out a survey about how many would take the option to return to school full time. So just a quick comment about that. We're actually not adverse. We are going to be surveying families. We're going to need to as we consider reopening going forward, and we will get that out to you. Our adversity, if it is that, or adverse feelings on that, actually has much more to do with wanting to make sure that before we ask you, we can say to you, this is what it would look like. There's a lot of unknowns to that, so we want to give you accurate information to get the most accurate information back to us for that planning. But you can expect to see something, I think, relatively soon, actually, to get an understanding of how people are feeling about that. Keep class sizes small. Governor Cuomo's current proposal holds foundation aid flat again. If it doesn't change how it will affect programming, we'll talk about that going forward. Please prioritize getting all kids back in school. Absolutely, 100% full-time. Do not accept anything less than full fair foundation aid from the state. We don't ever accept it. All year long, we talk about it with them. We have to accept it in the sense that the check that comes is the one you cash, but it doesn't mean that we say it's okay, ever. And that's constantly part of the conversation. I'd like to point out real quickly that Senator Cooney and Assemblymember Clark have bills in the Assembly and the Senate, respectively, to provide a floor for foundation aid. We had an excellent meeting this morning, actually, with Senator Cooney, met with legislators all last week, and we know Assemblymember Clark is working on this as well. They understand it, they get it, they are fighting very hard for it. We could not be more supportive of that effort, and in the room with them, with the sleeves up, saying this is what it means, this is what we need, and this is why, and this is how, and they have been really, really great about that. So that's a constant conversation for us. Please make it a top priority to preserve classroom teacher positions. And that's a very fair point. And again, one that we take very, very seriously. And that's a big part of our thinking. It's important to think about the bottom thoughts too, because just because it did not rate as highly with everybody in the community doesn't mean it's not a very important thought to the person that put it in. To them, it rates very highly. They wouldn't have said it otherwise. So every opinion counts in this format. The last 10 thoughts: more remote student in-person options needed. We need more opportunities for remote students to interact in person. Full day K, by not doing this, you are not setting children up for success. You're setting them up for failure. What happened to focusing on kids? Now, there are a lot of full day K comments that actually rated higher. I think sometimes when people read into the second part of the thought, they may not agree with that, and the rating might have to do with that. K-5 full-time with middle and high school hybrid. Pittsford has successfully had K-5 nearly full-time and older kids hybrid. Can this be considered in Brighton? Absolutely. It just depends on what the guidance tells us going forward if it changes, but that is definitely something that we're thinking about, looking at levels differently. Right now, we can't because of the space requirements, but perhaps that will change and we'll have an opportunity. That is a constant focus of our conversation right now. We should not have to pay for wraparound programming, and our kids deserve full education beginning in K. Due to tax burden, Brighton is not livable now. Brookside neighborhood's entrance needs to be blocked. Too much traffic in and out of Brookside. Full-time kindergarten, parents need to be able to return to work. We actually like hybrid. By the way, that's another good example. Full day K was highly rated, but I wonder if people reacted to the second part that not everybody sees the same way. By the way, all these times when I say we wonder, that's part of the reason why we would have these small groups tonight, so we can understand more from you as well. We actually like hybrid, less time spent on wasted junk. However, many don't. Please be aware of both. Our community's kids aren't behind academically. We decide what's behind. Couldn't agree more. I know this will not be a popular thought, but we've enjoyed the hybrid model as our student grades are better. Bullies are at bay. This helps keep the mind focused. It has worked well for some kids. We've tried to actually learn lessons from where it's worked well for people, understanding what coming back makes sense. BHS gym needs updates. Paint on the floor over Barron's looks awful. Changing the mascot costs money, and that should have been calculated in. It actually is and was, and there's very few of those kinds of changes. And we actually only replace uniforms anyways as they go through the normal replacement cycle. We didn't have uniforms that said Barron's on it any longer. Anyways, it was Brighton. More remote in-person options needed. We need more opportunities for remote students to interact in person. So we had mentioned that one too. So here's what you're going to do in those small groups. And I'll put this into the chat for people too, but the board and the administrators have these questions too. We are hoping for tonight that you can lend more voice to what has been shared. Essentially, we're saying, please tell us more. We'd like to understand more about what you are thinking and feeling, and those top thoughts, the bottom thoughts, but anything else that's on your mind doesn't have to have anything to do with what was shared in the thought exchange. We simply need more information from you and want your feedback. It's such an important part of the process. You're paying the bill. Tell us more about what you would like us to be doing. What are your thoughts about the thoughts? Are we on the right track? Do you have other suggestions? And I want to point out to you again, our focus right now and our thinking around those themes is that people want full day K. They want their kids back in person 5 days a week. We do too. And they don't want to go over the cap, and they don't want to lose any programming. So we'd like to understand how you feel about those things, how you feel about the thoughts, and essentially what else is on your mind. You joined this night, I'm guessing, for a reason. So please, please, please tell us more about that. So the breaking into groups just takes a minute or so. I'll be dividing you up into breakout rooms, and you'll have about 20 minutes to have that conversation. And then we'll pull back into the large group, and I'll ask spokespeople from each of the small groups to tell us a little bit more about how people felt and what else came up in those groups. All right, looks like everybody's back in. So we'll hopefully spend just maybe 2 minutes summarizing each room, if you could. I'll ask somebody from each room to jump up and tell us a little bit about the conversation. And then that'll leave us about 10 minutes at the end, or for however long people want to keep going, if they do, to just open up. And if anybody else has anything like to add or participate in any way, we'd love to have you do that too. So room number 1, when I popped in, Mark seemed to be taking notes, or no, Andrea just put her hand up. Somebody from room 1. You're on mute, though. You're all on mute. So, oh, that might, hold on one second. That may have, now you should be able to unmute yourself. Mark, there you go.
Andrea has our notes. I did take some notes also, but Andrea's got copious notes. So we had a great discussion in our group.
You can unmute yourself. Go ahead, Andrea.
There we go. Yeah, and Mark, chime in. Really, our group was concerned about safety, making sure that if we do come back, that it's under very safe conditions, and that they trust that the district will be doing that. They want to stress the importance of APs, the ESS program, rigor, and keep continuing to have a rich academic school environment. So no further reductions to, in that area. If there is a need for money to go to ventilation or filtration systems, they'd prefer it to go, or one of our group members said that that seemed to be an important part, because really everyone in that group wanted the 5 days a week. We're really looking for going into 5 days a week. And that's really mostly where our group was, having discussions. They didn't want clubs to be eliminated. It's an important part of the social and emotional aspect of our children. And, but many of them said it's not been an easy year, and they're looking to us to hopefully get into a 5 day a week safely. Mark, anything more?
It was emphasized how this is very, very stressful to some kids, more so than others. Paying attention to that as we move forward. The importance of extracurriculars. You never know what kids are engaged in certain ways in certain clubs and things. And also the safety aspect of bringing people back. That was stressed by all 4 of our parents, and I appreciate that. One question, Kevin, late in our discussion, maybe you can address it in the wrap up. What about using something like Brookside School or any other facilities to spread people out, spread kids out?
Yeah, actually, I'll just address that right now. I saw that as a comment in the exchange. It's not possible for us to do that because Brookside is not up to code for us to have by state ed code, right? So it's up to fire code, it's up to safety code for it to be occupied and to be utilized, for example, by the Montessori school, by other programs. But for us as a public school operation, we wouldn't be able to utilize it that way. The other issue would be relative to food service there and all of the different requirements that come into place when you're going to operate it as a public school facility, it changes dramatically and the financial investment would be significant and longstanding. It wouldn't be a temporary space opportunity. Lou, would you elaborate on that at all? Would you need to elaborate on that at all?
No, I think you hit the points. The capital investment and the time that it would take to do that, we just it's not adequate.
Yeah.
That
Thanks.
was it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Great.
one thought I do want to emphasize that was expressed, and these are my words, but so many of our kids, no matter how hard we work, can't really connect if they're not in school more and around their peers and their teachers. So, you know, we know that, and it was clearly delineated in our conversation.
Very fair point. Thank you. Group 2.
I have some notes, Sue, jump in if I miss anything or if some other thoughts that came up at the end. Some feedback that really appreciate what the district is currently doing, especially from the perspective of a kindergarten parent who is fully virtual, their child is fully virtual right now. They really appreciate everything. Wish things could be different, but they are really pleased with what the district is currently putting in place. We had a conversation, and Kevin, your timing jumping in was great because we were talking about what ifs in terms of some things, and you really clarified for the group that the plan is no cuts. And you clarified too that if we were going to be looking at cuts, that would be in an unfortunate situation if the budget should not pass, and we're not thinking about that right now. We are full steam ahead for a passed budget, and we're not looking at that at this time. Let's see. Also looking about how do we continue to gain community feedback in other ways. We had a dialogue around that in terms of different ways beyond thought exchange, or other ways to, if someone had some thoughts about changes and how could we get that information, and how do we continue the conversation going and keep having that conversation going around Fight for Brighton. What we talked about areas of, in terms of cuts, we went the opposite direction where there was an emphasis on where we want to grow and investing in the community, investing in our students in our schools, and that's a priority, including wherever we could to increase funding, because that's where the investment lies. The group felt that the district is fully aware of current circumstances, aware of the continuum of where people feel in terms of needing to make reductions or not make reductions, or on the other end, as I just described, is where if individuals would want to increase spending. So felt that we were in touch with the community and the situation, and where we stand right now. There was a shout out to appreciating the accessibility through this format. Sue asked a great question. How do people feel as we were structured within the breakout? It was a great question and a conversation starter. Folks appreciated the accessibility to the board, to administration, and to stakeholders to get feedback. Did I miss anything?
I think you summarized it beautifully. It was a great discussion, and I think the group appreciated following a presentation or like an overview of the thought exchange feedback. It was nice to have an opportunity in smaller groups to sort of like discuss what we just heard, in case not all community members had a chance to read through all the thought exchange. We all have, so it was a nice sort of like debriefing, you know, where people could be face to face and talk in smaller groups. So a real positive experience. So
Super. Glad to hear it. Group number 3. Thanks, Deanna. Thanks, Sue.
Good evening. So Julian Gilbert, Dan Goldman, and myself had we're fortunate to have a discussion with Dr. Mendoza and parent Chris with a remote child. And we talked about intervention services as kids transition back, and making sure there's equitable resource allocation for kids that are struggling and have struggled during the COVID time, and the kids that have excelled during this time, making sure that they are coming back and they're getting the enrichment opportunities you know, that they deserve as well. Then we talked a lot about mental health, and Dr. Mendoza shared a lot about his concerns with the unknown of mental health and the impact that this pandemic has had on young people. We talked about opportunities for partnership and leveraging resources to make connections early and early intervention with mental health. So we talked a lot about strategies and things we can be doing, and generally the district being prepared to support our kids in mental health, and making sure that the budget has enough resources to be able to respond to those unknown needs as we learn more about them and peel back the true impact of what we've been experiencing. Julene, anything else that you'd want to add?
Yeah, we did talk about when we get to the point of reopening, having opportunities for families who still are not comfortable sending their children back into the buildings, and will we have remote opportunities as well? And that is clearly on our radar and in our thoughts right now. And that it's realistic to think that there will be families who will not send their children back for very, very good health reasons, that there are still concerns, and there possibly could be concerns for some time to come.
Great,
Correct?
thank you.
Right?
Yes, no, that's great. That was a great
Yeah.
piece of omitted.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah,
talked
that was
about
important.
part of our risk provisions within the budget being able to respond to those, to provide those opportunities and be able to respond to, the state requirements in that regard.
Great. Thanks to both of you. And group 4, last but certainly not least. Heather, were you going to report out for the group?
I'll start, but you know what? Poor Heather was stuck with Karen and Larry and Christina and myself. So it was sort of like a command performance for sure. We spent quite a bit of time talking about just hypothesizing, if you will, crystal balling where the state's going to go. What do we think kind of the conditions are? And I think Larry did a nice job kind of reinforcing as to Karen the notion that we feel like our current setup with the current legislators really have a deeper understanding of education and how the aid can flow more so than perhaps in the near past. So anyway, again, that was a bulk of the time. We talked about, similar to what you were just saying, Jolene, the idea that as we start to think about reopening, be it this year or then, as we move into next year, it's really about, creating multiple scenarios so that we know that there will be students whose parents or for whomever we need to plan for them for remote. And so how does that look? What's that going to look like? We also talked about, and Heather, I'm just going to pick on you a little bit. It probably wouldn't be a conversation without talking about how much that the students these days have appreciated a little bit of a later start time.
Yes.
No doubt. That would be seconded and thirded in my home for sure. So
I just wanted to add too that because I got cut off before I got to finish with my group, that I just wanted to say out of all of this uncertainty and chaos, there have been some real positives besides the sleep. For my high schooler, she made a point when I asked her about, well, I said, do you really like this, besides the sleep? And she said, yeah, because, for instance, in one of her classes where there are literally 10 kids, she said, we are all communicating now. It's not like there's, one group of kids communicating and then the rest of us we're all like, they all have a group chat going and they help each other with work and stuff because it's only 10 kids. So I just wanted to say that I think we're fortunate in my family that it's worked out, but that it's just nice to see some of the positives that have come out of this.
that's a great point. Definitely trying to keep learning what has worked well, and then how do you post-COVID translate that into the school environment as it's kind of recreated and rethought as we restart. Thank you. All right, so that's all 4 groups. We have a few more minutes, but frankly, as many as people need. Doesn't have to end. We're scheduled to be 7 to 8, but we're always willing to stick around and talk for as long as people would like to. Is there anybody that would like to unmute and jump in? Anybody like to clarify anything else? We have a couple clarifications and additional comments in the chat, which are great, but feel free, now would be a great time to do that if you'd like to talk a little bit more.
Hey, Kevin, I did see in the chat, maybe it's worth a minute or two between you and Debbie. Today, the announcement on the 4 Regents exams that we're going to apparently have to give. Any thoughts as far as a plan for additional supports or how we go about, working with our kids who might need additional whatever to get to that point, or are thinking on it now. I realize I'm putting you on the spot. I apologize for that, but
No, that's okay. One, I don't know that this is a done deal just yet. So the announcement today, as reported, as opposed to what's happening, might be two different things. But I do think it's a fair bet that the 4 announced today will be the 4 Regents exams that are given, because they're required by the federal government, by the ESSA requirements. And so alongside giving 3 through 8 assessments, the state asked for a waiver, and that was rejected by the federal government. So there's not a choice in that, and those 4 exams would be the ones offered. You know, I think one, this has been a big conversation at the high school, and teachers is just essentially trying to find out, is my exam going to be offered? And if it is, what do I need to do to get my kids ready? So that's a daily conversation with high school teachers. We have done quite a bit, and it's growing over time, to bring kids in at different times off their hybrid days to do more work in school where they needed additional help. And for very specific reasons, having kids work in some different groups and with some different supports. And the high school's been pretty flexible about trying to find different ways to get at that throughout the year. I would guess that that will only increase as we get closer to those Regents exams, with some very targeted support for kids that need that more. But I think that's a very fair point that Cindy brings up, and things that we need to be thinking about as we get closer to the end of the year. That being said, the far smarter person on this would be Debbie. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's more elaborating a little bit on what you were saying, Kevin. I mean, we just without knowing at this point in time what the actual schedule is, when you think about the original plan and what typically pre-COVID would happen, we would almost set aside 2 weeks for Regents exams. Well, with only 4 exams, as long as the state kind of changes the schedule and pushes those, if you will, towards the end, that leaves us with a nice, healthy cushion prior to that, between, and again, this is all up in the air as far as when's the last day of school and, when's the last day of, instruction and everything, but a cushion to be able to support those students. And the other piece is knowing that, the teachers have gone into this year and with the idea being, and because we said to them from the get-go, assume we will have Regents. So it's with that in mind. And yes, they have lightened the load and prioritized the curriculum, but one of the areas that they prioritized against is what is typically tested on the Regents. So I to Kevin's point, I think we will be in a fairly decent position and do the best that we can to make sure that all the kids who are taking those exams are adequately prepared and feeling confident about their abilities.
Can I ask a quick question to Debbie about the exams and maybe even the 3 through 8 exams? Is there any sense that the format would be modified in any way, or that there would be any changes to reflect the conditions we've been operating under?
So the 3 through 8, we have learned, are going to be shortened. I mean, not dramatically so. They will still be over 2 days. The first day tends to be more of a reading multiple choice. The second day are reading, writing. I think what they've done is they've reduced it, don't quote me, by like 5 to 6 multiple choice questions, which would probably be about 1 passage or so. As far as the Regents exams, we haven't really heard that they are, that they've changed the format at all, and don't anticipate that they will. But it literally is at this point in time a very fluid conversation. The Board of Regents is meeting on the 15th of this month. Part of the one of the agenda items is to discuss not only the Regents, but like what we're going to be doing about them. And we anticipate shortly thereafter, we will be receiving guidance from the state on more of these specifics.
Thanks, Debbie. Anybody else like to open up their microphone, unmute, and participate in any way? Hi, Rebecca.
Hi. One of the questions that came up in my group was looking at things like cafeteria spaces and some of these, I know space in our building's a concern, but having large groups of students together, if COVID remains a factor, is a concern looking ahead. Are there plans on how some of those larger spaces might be addressed?
So that's a really great question. That you get at the heart of the conversation about how do you reopen and what does that look like under the current guidance? If guidance changes, what does it mean? So just for example, I don't have a concrete answer for you, but I have an example to give of how it is being talked about and thought about. So just French Road, for example, if we were to reopen and be thinking that you should still have 6 feet, especially because a mask would be removed to eat and drink, you know, half the class really would only be able to be in there at a time, capacity wise, because that's right now under the hybrid model what there is. So what that would likely entail is that half the class would be in the cafeteria and half the class would be eating in the classroom. There's all sorts of complications to that, right? Getting food to kids, food allergies, and food being in the classroom. But it's really for us also a supervision issue to make sure there's somebody then with kids while they're eating, because that's when faculty and staff are eating at that same time. So we just really are trying to think outside the box for how would you have enough people to do that? How would you flex time and move people? That's kind of the logistical piece of, yes, we wouldn't all of a sudden double the capacity in those spaces. It would just be simply unsafe to do that. So how would you do it in a way that would accommodate and use the staff that we have available or any resources we have available to do that? So, and then we would be rethinking everything around assembly type programs, things like that. That would be another example of the way we've rethought work because of the access to technology and Zoom, et cetera, that you can just do things differently now than we were doing them before, and would be likely to do more of that instead of bringing large groups together, you know, for quite a while, I would guess. Does that answer your question, Rebecca? Great, thank you. Anybody else or anything else for the good of the order? We have a board meeting Tuesday night. We'll update our budget proposal too. We'll be communicating out to the community. It's always at bcsd.org. Our meetings are, recordings are, et cetera, and information will be forthcoming, and another budget forum will come after that as well. So stay tuned. We really appreciate you taking the time to lend voice to the thoughts and additional comments and really help us think about these things deeply. It was a great, great conversation, and we appreciate everybody being a part of it. Hope you have a great night. Take care, stay safe, stay masked, and stay distanced. Take care.
This has been a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District Board of Education.